So this is what it's like inside a woman before labour's really got going. So some things have happened by now. There's been a bit of a latent phase because there's been quite a lot of changes to this cervix already. Before labour starts, this cervix joins together here and sticks out a bit longer. It's about 3 centimetres long and hangs down into the top end of the vagina. And so in this early phase of labour, the different things that happen include the cervix shortening, so it becomes the same thickness as the lower part of the uterus. It softens, it goes from being quite firm to being quite soft and stretchy, and it moves from what we call a posterior position, which is right round the back, to coming round the front. And that can mean that early on in labour, those examinations that we do internally to find out what's happening can be a bit disheartening if you've not progressed in terms of how open the cervix is from 0 to 10 centimetres dilated. But to think about all those other changes that the cervix makes can help you think how you may well have made some progress. So it might have softened or shortened or moved around to the front, even if it hasn't become any more open. Sometimes if it's right round the back and we can't even find it, then that generally suggests that you're not yet in labour. And if those examinations early on are really uncomfortable, or difficult to find the cervix, we ask you to make fists out of your hands to lift your pelvis up a bit so we can get further around the back to feel it. But don't worry if that's really uncomfortable. If you tell us to stop at any point, of course we'll stop. But also, as things progress, those examinations do become a lot more comfortable because of how the cervix changes shape and becomes easier to find. So there's the baby inside this bag of waters that's inside, it's also called the amniotic sac, inside this bag of muscles called the uterus or the womb. And nicely tucked up in this position, you can see how the chin's on the chest, just like this. And if you've ever tried to put a tight t-shirt on a small child, you know that they have to put their chin down there so that the smallest part of them is coming through that hole in the t-shirt. And it's the same for babies. If they're tucked up in this nice position, we call it a flexed position, then they tend to come more easily. As the labour progresses, I want you to notice how the baby doesn't just come out in a straight line. The baby's got this really big corner to turn around. And also that the baby doesn't stay in the same position that it's in now, but it comes out in a corkscrew motion, turning around as it comes out. And I also want you to look at the rectum. See the shape of the normal rectum there and what happens as things progress. So here there's been a lot of contractions. The cervix has opened up to 10 centimetres dilated, and the waters are bulging down ahead of the baby. The baby's moved quite low down into the birth canal. And look at what's happened to the rectum. It's got completely squashed. And you've got a nerve that's in your rectum, and it goes up to your brain and tells your brain when your rectum's full. And that's why when you get to this point in the labour, you feel like you really need to go to the toilet. And your brain recognises it very strongly as that sensation. And that's a sensation that grows into that overwhelming urge to bear down and push the baby out. And as midwives, we're really happy when women start to feel like they really need to go to the toilet because they're probably progressing really well. So the baby's rotating round a bit as it's coming down into the bend of that corner. And the woman's going to be getting really strong urges to push. And with those pushing urges, especially with a first-time mum, you get the urge to push, you bear down and push the baby down, and with each contraction the baby just goes a little bit further down, and then at the end of the contraction it goes back up again. And with the next contraction just a little bit further down and then back up again. And it keeps doing that for quite a long time, and for a lot of people it can feel like nothing's happening. But usually just gradual progress is being made, and the baby's making its way around this big corner in the pelvis. And it gets to a point where we can start to see the hair of your baby. We can know whether you're having a baldy or not. We can really encourage your efforts and work with you in helping you to feel as comfortable as possible during that time. So it gets to a stage where it's round the corner and it's no longer going to be going back again, and that means that it's really got round there and it's going to start to crown with the next contraction. And when the head comes out, it doesn't all come out in one go. It's not head, body and everything. The baby's not meant to shoot out of there like a champagne cork. It wouldn't do you any good. What happens, the head comes out and then the head turns around and then the shoulders turn around and then the shoulders start to come out. So it's a process that's quite dynamic, with the baby moving around and adjusting its body to fit the space. And it can take a few contractions. It's not always over in one, so just be patient at that stage and working with whatever your body's doing. Now, going back to this one of the reasons why active birth is so important is really well demonstrated with just looking at one of these pictures again. If you just turn it the other way up and think about labour done lying on the bed, in that position that's all too often used, unfortunately, throughout the world, where you've got to push this baby right round the corner and up a hill, and it just demonstrates how much harder that is to have a baby from a lying down position, when you just turn the woman up this way and be upright and moving and working with it, it just makes it so much easier to have that baby. Okay, so the speeded up version of that is when the baby of labour is when the baby enters the pelvis around here somewhere and goes down here, and on the way down there's these twists and turns as it comes out to there. And to do that, there's a few things that help. For one thing, on the baby's head, the skull bones aren't yet fused together, and so there's little gaps in between these bones in the skull, which makes the baby's head able to squash up to fit through the birth canal. Also, when you're pregnant, you release a hormone called relaxin, and it gets into all the joints in the pelvis to make it soft and stretchy. Another most significant thing is when the baby's really deeply engaged down here in the pelvis, the sacrum and the coccyx, the last two bits of the backbone, actually lift up and out of the way to let the baby through. So the pelvic outlet grows by nearly 3 centimetres to let the baby out. When you're in labour, every time you move your hips, you're helping the baby to do that journey, to do all those twists and turns. And it's not so much that one position is better than another, it's just that moving it really, really helps the baby. And the one thing that's really not helpful is that classic one ball every minute position. You see so often on television, on films, all over the place, this position where most women in the world give birth, where the woman sat on her bottom, and so the sacrum and the coccyx are being flattened, and the outlet that the baby's trying to come out of is actually made smaller by that position. So that's the one position that's good to avoid. So the active phase of labour is defined when your cervix is at least 4 centimetres dilated and you're having at least 3 really good contractions or tightenings in a 10-minute period. So active phase of labour in a 10-minute time frame. And I got this idea from Nikki Leap, who did study the Albany midwives and how they helped women with dealing with pain in labour. And it's just a really nice scenario just to break down what can seem overwhelming into little bits that are more manageable. So to think about the start of these tightenings, they're like a period type pain. And most women have had good experience in dealing with period type pains. Things like using a hot water bottle, holding that on the bit that hurts, or a wheat bag that you heat up in the microwave, or massage, or moving around, or just hiding under the duvet, whatever works for you. Just a simple technique that helps you in period type pains is likely to help you in the early stages and with contractions as well. So it starts like that, and then it gets stronger, and then it gets ever so strong, and then it just gets completely awesome what your body can do. And it's really strong, but the strongest bit's not the longest, and then it starts to ease off into incredibly strong, really strong, very strong, and then back down into period type pain again, totally manageable, and then you get this amazing little break in the middle where it's just tranquility and bliss before it starts off again as a period type pain, getting stronger and ever so strong and completely awesome, and then it starts to ease off into really strong, incredibly strong, very strong period type pain, and then back into that lovely little space in the middle, and then off it goes again, period type pain, getting really super strong and easing off again. I nearly ran out of paper, just about managed to get them on. But you can see that within a 10-minute time frame they'll be really strong and really regular. What happens for some people is that they'll get this and they'll say, oh, that was 3 in 10 minutes, I'm going to phone the midwife to let her know that I'm in labour. And because they've not done labour before, they're not really sure that this isn't that, because it might be stronger than period pain they've had before, but it's actually not yet that. And we can often hear in her voice, if she phones up and she's talking to us through these, she's probably not yet having those ones, because when you're having these ones, they generally take your concentration away and you have to work with them a little bit more. You can't really have a chat through them in the same way that you can with these. So we might recommend that she just maybe has a couple of paracetamol and gets in the bath and sees what's happened. And she'll do that, and maybe they'll completely be knocked off by going into the water, and she might be very comfortable and end up having quite a good night's sleep. Maybe in the early hours of the morning there's the odd tightening, or maybe a run of a few tightenings, sometimes stronger, sometimes weaker, running throughout the day, getting stronger sometimes more frequent, sometimes with big gaps between them. The gaps can be just a couple of minutes, or they can be hours. It can be very variable, and for a lot of women it can be a lot of work, this. It can be quite strong, some of these, but what they're not quite doing is getting into that regular 3 in 10. There might be 3 in 20 minutes, or 3 in an hour, and then maybe 5 in half an hour, but just not quite getting to that. And this phase that's quite irregular, where things are stopping and starting, sometimes stronger, sometimes weaker, is called the latent phase of labour. It's the bit where the body's getting ready to go into labour. And it's the bit where the cervix goes from being closed to being open to about 4 centimetres. And for some people, this latent phase can last as long as 5 days. And that can be a real shock for people, because they just don't expect to be 5 days having tightenings without really producing a baby at that point. And so, if there's one thing you learn from this workshop, it's how important it is to rest and look after yourself in this phase. You really need to keep yourself watered and fed and rested. So make yourself a lovely nest with every pillow and cushion in the house, and you might find it helpful to apply some of the techniques, such as the sacral pressure or the hip squeezes, during that time when you're resting, to get the most out of that time. Some people say, I'm so uncomfortable I couldn't possibly sleep. But then they come in active phase of labour, and they learn to power nap during these tiny little spaces here, because they're so desperate for sleep. And if you'd really concentrated on how to get rest, how to get sleep, how to get good quality food in at this point, then you're going to be in a much better state for dealing with this marathon that is labour. Because for people having the first baby, when you get into this phase, for most first timers, it takes an average of 12 hours. So for some people it can take more, some people less, but it's an average of 12 hours of really hard work, on top of what might have been quite a long, hard start to the proceedings. The other thing is about eating and drinking. So it's possible at the end of this active phase, when you get towards the end and you're pushing the baby out, to just keep yourself going on rubbish food, on caffeine and sugar and stuff like that. But actually you don't want to be doing that for 5 days and then for the 12 hours of the marathon. You want to be eating really good quality food here, drinking water and eating good proteins, good vegetables, and not just piling in the junk food, because you're not going to be feeling very good for this if you haven't got good fuel in your tank. So some people just approach labour in a really accepting fashion. So these tightenings come along and they relax, they breathe, there's long, slow out breath. They don't tense up their muscles and fight it at all, they just go with it, and they ride these big tightenings just like a surfer surfs the waves, with confidence and strength, and it just doesn't faze them. And for those women, they won't need any of the techniques that I'm demonstrating in these videos. They just know that their bodies can do it, and they don't have any issues with it, and they don't tense up and fight against it, so it all runs more smoothly. The more you tense up and hold your breath and fight against what's happening, the more it hurts and the longer it takes and the harder it is. So the more you can relax and work with it, the better. And when those tightenings start there, as I say, just like period pains, you've dealt with those before, you know how to deal with them. So the beginning of them's all right, and the end of them's all right. It's just finding yourself a trick to get you through that bit in the middle where it's at its most strong point. And so this active birth, it's not about getting rid of the pain altogether, it's just about bringing that strongest pain in the middle down to a more manageable level. And a lot of the techniques demonstrate that. It's just something to just take the edge off that bit in the middle when it's really strong.